Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Before we get going, if we can just take a moment to usher in the ancestors, thank them for allowing us to be here, invite them in to share their knowledge, and then once they share their knowledge with us, let us also be open to give away the knowledge of the ancestors. So if it's available to you, if you don't mind closing your eyes or maybe lowering your lids just a tad, and just sit quiet and invite the ancestors in. Ashe. Maybe for some of you that was the first quiet moment of the day. I invite you to take another one sometime later today. So first I want to start with greetings to our esteemed panel, and thanks to Dr. Benjamin for moderating what I know will be an inspiring and thought-provoking conversation. Thanks also to Sarah Goldstein. I know Sarah does not like me to call her out, but can we give a round of applause to Sarah Goldstein? Sarah makes us look good. So thank you, Sarah. By now, you might have figured out that I am not the one you probably came looking for, Dr. Dean Corey Walker, right? In case you came looking for Corey. Corey is traveling and should probably, more than likely, if everything goes well, maybe show up. But if you're wondering who I am Julia Jordan-Zachery, the chair of the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies Department here at Wake Forest. So that by now you're probably wondering, well, what does she have to do with Africana Studies? Well, if you know anything about me, I go between Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies and African or Black Studies, depending on what you call it. That's where I've been living for the past almost half of my career at this point. And don't worry what half of my career looks like. I'm only 21, but I've been doing this for a really, really long time, right? So I really have the honor of offering just a few remarks, because I know you all didn't come to hear me, came to hear our panel. And so I want to really center these brief remarks on three central keys as we think of the futures, plural, of Africana Studies. One of the things we need to think about is the radical roots of Africana Studies and how we begin to imagine the continued institutionalization of Africana Studies, especially in this context. And if you know anything, this context isn't necessarily new. It is just evolving in a different way. Africana Studies has always been in peril. And whether it is funding, whether it is placement on actual campuses, oftentimes, Africana Studies might be buried beneath, and students sometimes can't find us. So how do we begin to think about the radical roots and how we also imagine the continued institutionalization of Africana Studies? Might institutionalization look differently if we move it outside of the academy, for example? We also need to think about the intellectual roots of Africana Studies and how we continue to build on these roots by ensuring an inclusive space. How do we invite in new theories and new pedagogies? How do we invite new epistemologies and ontologies that remain grounded in a social functional foundation that is Africana Studies? I was drawn to Africana Studies because of its social functional element, which means that it is grounded in something beyond the academy. It is designed for freedom. And so how do we begin to imagine those intellectual roots grounded in a position of freedom as we imagine the futures of Africana Studies? How are we imagining Africana Studies in a way that allows us to dream and hope? Oh my gosh, so many of us are wondering, how do we continue to hope? And for me, my hope is rested in Africana Studies, the writings of folk like Audre Lorde, who was dying with cancer and found hope, right? And if Audre Lorde could stand flat-footed in that hope, how can we not also stand flat-footed in the hope that we have inherited as we work our way through this current time? Because there will always be a current time, right? I jokingly say, I refuse to give away my despair. If I'm going to be in despair, it's going to be for not this, right? I'm going to remain flat-footed in hope. And so how are we imagining Africana Studies in a way that allows us to dream and dream really, really big, reaching a global student body? And when I say student body, I'm not using that in the context of a neoliberal capitalist society or institution. I'm thinking that we're all students of freedom. So how do we dream Africana Studies to meet those that want to dream alongside us in their hopes for freedom? This means that we have to think about digital technologies and how they allow us to move beyond the classroom. But in thinking about digital technologies, let us not forget that we owe our environments something. And so we have to be careful of how we use AI as we advance our knowledge, for example, given that it's linked to environmental racism. So how do we begin to think of these futures from multiple perspectives, leaving the earth better than where we found it, and how we found it, I should say, right? And so where is the place for technology in that? Okay. As I close, I offer you two quotes. The first one, we are a collective. Let me say that again. We are a collective of Black feminists who have been meeting together since 1974. During that time, we have been involved in the process of defining and clarifying our politics, while at the same time doing political work, the Combahee River Collective. The second quote, I felt that somehow being a revolutionary intellectual might be a goal to which one might aspire, for surely there was no real reason why one should remain in the academic world, that is, remain an intellectual and at the same time not be revolutionary. Anybody knows where that quote's from? Walter Rodney. Okay? Why these two quotes, my dear friends? These two quotes give us a blueprint as we imagine the futures of Africana Studies. They tell us that we can simultaneously do things, that we can be in spaces and not of spaces, that we have the right to make those spaces what we imagine them to be. So let us imagine together Africana Studies and the futures that we hope for and make real in every effort we do. Thank you. I now turn it over to Dr. Shannon Benjamin, our Reynolds Professor of African American Studies.
Thank you so much, Julia, and welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Futures of Africana Studies, a public conversation. As Julia mentioned, my name is Shanna Benjamin, and I am honored to serve as tonight's moderator. I told someone a little earlier that I'm just going to direct traffic and try to stay out of the way for the wonderful presentations that we have planned for you this evening. So after some introductions for our guests, I will give them each 5 to 7 minutes to talk a little bit about their programs. If you don't already know very much about their programs, this will give you a thumbnail sketch, a brief overview. So we'll hear the history, the development, the evolution, and the trajectory of their respective programs. And after each has had the opportunity to introduce themselves and their programs, then we will get into a couple open-ended questions. And I've given everybody the opportunity and the latitude to answer whatever questions are speaking to them tonight. So for any and all questions you may hear from all of the panelists, or you may just hear from a handful of the panelists. But we welcome their thoughts on a variety of issues related to tonight's theme. So on behalf of Chair Corey D.B. Walker and the distinctive intellectual community we're building here in the program in African American Studies at Wake Forest, I welcome you. I will begin immediately to my left with Professor Eddy Souffrant. who is professor of philosophy and chair of Africana Studies at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. In addition to serving as chair, he stands among the leading professional philosophers in the United States, working at the intersection of philosophy and international relations. His former specializations are applied ethics, history of Anglo-American social and political philosophy, and philosophy of international affairs. From there, we have Professor Noelle Morrissette, Director of African American and African Diaspora Studies and Professor of English at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. She's the author of Anne Spencer, Between Worlds, James Weldon Johnson's Modern Soundscapes, and editor of New Perspectives on James Weldon Johnson's The Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man. She is a proud graduate of the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, where she earned her BA and completed her graduate degrees in African Studies and African American Studies and English Literature at Yale University. She is the recipient, most recently, of an HD Fellowship in American Literature at the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale, and a Lillian Gary Taylor Visiting Fellowship at the University of Virginia Special Collections. Next, we have Stephanie Lee, Professor of English and Professor of African American Studies and Chair of the Department at Duke University. A graduate of Stanford and Cornell Universities, where she earned her BA and PhD respectively. Professor Lee is the author of several articles, including Elizabeth Warren's A Fighting Chance, Reflections on 50 Years of the Bluest Eye, and Genre Trouble, and History's Miseries in Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad. She's also the author of the book Zora Neale Hurston, A Life in American History, and most recently, Ugly White People, Writing Whiteness in Contemporary America, which explores representations of whiteness from 21st century white American authors, revealing white recognition of the ugly forms whiteness can take. And finally, we have Professor Claude Clegg, who is the department chair and Lyle V. Jones Distinguished Professor of African American and Diaspora Studies with a joint appointment in the Department of History at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Professor Clegg earned his BA in Afro-American Studies and Political Science at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and his PhD in History from the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor. His current research focuses on the African diaspora of the Atlantic world, exploring the ways in which people of African descent have created and imagined communities and identities outside of Africa. He is the author of 4 books, including An Original Man, The Life and Times of Elijah Muhammad, The Price of Liberty, African Americans and the Making of Liberia, Troubled Ground, A Tale of Murder, Lynching, and Reckoning in the New South, and The Black President, Hope and Fury in the Age of Obama. He is currently writing a biography of Marcus Garvey. And before we get started, let's give all of our panelists a round of applause. So there's no particular order, but Professor Souffrant, would you like to get us started with the overview of your program, the history, development, evolution, and trajectory?
Good evening. First, it's on, I think it's on, yes. Thank you. It's a pleasure being here, and I thank the university for its hospitality, obviously, Julia, Shanna, Sarah, and Corey, who's not present. But I was walking through the campus and noticed how wooded it was, and also how it seems to have invited the students to take part in the intellectual life. And I was told by Julia that it appears as if the structure of the university has the residential halls on the outskirts, and they all converge on the intellectual center of the university. And I thought that to be particularly interesting, in large part because I'm coming here to speak about a program that I think should be a center of all academic disciplines, academic programs in universities. It's interesting that the Africana Studies Department or the African and African American Studies Department or the Black Studies Department are threatened politically when, in point of fact, every department, every discipline is looking for a black scholar. And so if the Africana Studies Department, the African American Studies Department, or the Black Studies Department are threatened, then all of our programs are threatened. I say over the past couple of years, I've said to some of our students and our colleagues that it is the only department in the university that's not looking for a black scholar, that is not looking for a particularly minority scholar. Well, it goes without saying, if you're looking for a minority scholar, if you're looking for a black scholar, you're not inclusive enough, right? And it's paradoxical and somewhat ironic to the department that is most inclusive is a department that is threatened. That is a sense of an introduction to speak about the challenge. We'll go through these other opportunities to speak more about these elements, but to speak about the history of the very department that I'm chairing at the moment. I come to the department via the philosophy department, and philosophy is really my discipline. As Shanna proposed, clearly I do work at the intersection of a number of fields. My publications are in those general areas, but I am a person who is particularly concerned about the Atlantic trades, the Atlantic travels, the connections between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. And our department over at Charlotte was built by the efforts of a number of individuals, but more specifically, the effort of Bertha Maxwell Roddy, who was the founder of the department. It morphed into various iterations from Black Studies, African American, and to now Africana. We were thinking at some point when I first got to the university of a diaspora, African diaspora sort of moniker for it, but we've settled on the Africana Studies Department. So the legacy of Bertha Maxwell Roddy remains, and so it started to impact the university, the legacy, but also the founder of the department, when the university, now university, formerly Charlotte College at some point, was built to counter, given the sort of segregationist dispositions in the South, in North Carolina, or in Charlotte, to offer an opportunity for returning vets who were primarily of ethnic European descent, who couldn't or didn't want to attend Johnson C. Smith. And so the college was built for those vets. That's the history of the university. And within, you can very well imagine that within that context where it was built to serve a particular segment of the population, how Bertha Maxwell Roddy would find it, I would say, in my optimistic disposition, as a fruitful environment to build a department or to try to establish a department. Over the years, the department has seen not many chairs, but it has come to be at the moment a thriving department that caters, in addition to the competition that started with Johnson C. Smith, but it has developed its own identity in that it has graduated a number of individuals within the African American community, the Asian community, the Hispanophone community, and so forth. And so we have been building on that, and the efforts, all this to say that the efforts to have the department grow came to a standstill a couple of years ago, when we were in the process of asking the legislature and also the assembly, the faculty assembly, and the administration of the UNC system to grant us the opportunity to build an MA program. We had done the work. We had spoken. My predecessor, the interim chair of the department, did the work, contacted a number of our colleagues, some of them sitting here with me, to found this new graduate program. We had a certificate program, but we decided to let go of the certificate program to make way for the master's program, which we thought would serve not only the urban environment in Charlotte, but also link with the different sectors within the state, but also beyond, because we thought it could be a sort of an en route master to get to a PhD program in Africana Studies. The legislature decided, I'm misspeaking. It was perceived by some of our administrators that the legislature would not support it. And so for the time being, this particular master's program is put on hold until there are, one would think, a change in the political mood of, if not the state of the country. So we remain hopeful, and certainly we remain hopeful because the PhD program that Chapel Hill has instituted is a sort of marker, a kind of a North Star for us, and we think and we hope to be able to provide or cultivate students that would ultimately be part of this program. We still think that we are doing a good work with our undergraduate students, and we are hopeful that they will continue to pursue this study of Africana or African American or Black studies generally. I'll stop here because there are some other elements, but I know between 5 and 7 minutes, that's about what we've got.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you. Professor Morrissette?
Okay. Can you hear me? A little bit. So I'm the Program Director of African American and African Diaspora Studies at UNC Greensboro. How did we end up with Black Studies, right? This is the North Carolina College for White Women, founded in 1896, I want to say. I'm not a historian. I should ask you, Claude. I'm off between 2 and 11 years usually, but I'm pretty sure that's the founding date. So how do you end up with Black Studies at an institution that from the start specifically excludes that population? It's 1956 when both Chapel Hill and UNC Greensboro begin to make an effort to integrate. 2 young Black women attend UNC Greensboro. It's something. I won't get into the specifics of that, but suffice it to say that they are cordoned off from white students at the university. From there is a slow increase of black students who are accepted to UNCG, and at a certain point, men are accepted as well. And in 1967, I want to say, the Neo-Black Society forms and becomes a really important organization that is bridging community interests, staff interests at the university, and student interests in devising a Black Studies concentration/major. So you'll find that there is a Black Power Forum that's held at the university in 1972, that Neo-Black Society is instrumental in kind of bringing to campus. This has a lot of effects. I guess if we're just doing the progressive march in history, we're like, yeah, right, that was good, right? But of course, administrators at the university are terrified of this, right? And are frowning upon what they see as an unwelcome organization/activism on campus. And it's a difficult and profoundly unwelcoming campus, I would say, for Black students in the 70s and the 80s. Where the university starts to move the needle and entertain the idea of Black Studies concentration is when an event that gets brought to the news and record publicizes racism at the university. So a young Black woman who is a residential assistant informs a white woman student there that she is not permitted to have male guests at the dorm at that time. It quickly escalates, and the white student calls the Black woman some unspeakable things. As a result, the Black student is suspended from the university, which has, further-reaching consequences in terms of expectations of behavior, if you're thinking about this, right? Some of the students on campus who are organized go to the News and Record with this story and report it and hold the university accountable for suspending the student who was doing her job, right, and not having any punitive measure for the student who's committed these verbal acts of violence, right? So out of all of this, there's a push from kind of 1981 to 83, in that realm of time, to have a loose concentration of Black Studies courses. Some are coming, the sort of students have the opportunity to cobble together an informal concentration in Black Studies. But really what they've been pushing for, what Neo-Black Society and the Black Student Alliance and some other groups on campus have been pushing for, is a greater diversity of faculty, right? There are 148 Black students at UNCG in the early 70s, I want to say 1974, and there's only 8 Black faculty. Also, I think thinking about this institution's history, it has approximately 65 years to calcify its exclusionary practices, right? From its founding as a white woman's college up until the point where there are these efforts to desegregate. And so those are really shaping, I think it continues to reverberate at the university today, right? So from 1982, we end up with a development of some courses. The Student Government Association gets behind it. And you're noticing I'm talking about a lot of student groups, right? And the development, I think, of Black students organizing with Black staff members, as well as the few faculty members, to try to bring about a different universe at the university. In 1992, it becomes something like an official concentration, Black Studies, and 2 courses get on the books regularly. That's our intro course and Blacks in American Society, which are still offered as the foundational courses in the major and the minor, and which also now serve parts of the general education curriculum. And from there, it develops into an official major by 2002. So we're talking about 20 years or more, right, of tremendous commitment from leaders who are advancing the idea of a concentration and trying to move the needle to end up with a Black Studies program. The program changes names. It starts as Black Studies. It changes to African American Studies, with the idea being that it's embracing North and South hemispheres of Black existence. And in 2014, the name changes again to our current name, African American and African Diaspora Studies. What else do I want to say about this? At our point of greatest flourishing as a program, we had 6 tenure-line faculty. At the moment, we have 2.5. So the challenges that folks faced when it was just a concentration are also the challenges that we face now. It's about sustainability. It's about the precarity. It's about trying to advance and demonstrate to students this universe of community where they can find themselves and each other, and a community that reaches out to the community as well. And that's just really challenging to do. So the one thing that was not in the intro is that we had a Mellon Multivocal Humanities grant last year, right? So I served as a PI, and I worked with a team of people like Cedric, who is in the audience here, to really advance the life of African American and African Diaspora Studies, both at UNCG and in the broader community. And I would say that grant was profoundly, had a profound impact. The challenge is that it doesn't continue. You know, at some point, you hope to have some institutional backing. Mm-hmm. But the phrase that's been used for our program, and what I'll leave you with is, this sense of chronic underfunding, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. So Edwin, all of the folks who were directors and later reviewers would provide that as the framework for understanding UNCG's challenges as an African American and African Diaspora Studies program.
Yes, thank you for that. Professor Lee.
Good evening. I want to begin by just saying how delighted I am to be here tonight, and also to thank our host, Shanna, Julia, and especially Corey, for the vision of bringing us all together into this conversation and highlighting the community, a sense of community that is so fundamental to Black Studies. This year, Duke is celebrating its centennial, but it is not the centennial of African and African American Studies at Duke. It began as a program. It developed into a department, and it exists because students and faculty saw that Duke, as it was originally established, with departments of biology and chemistry and English and philosophy, that the institution was not enough. And therefore, these students and faculty mobilized and agitated for a new way of seeing the world, which is through the experience of African Americans in the United States. I want to emphasize this because we have to realize that the institutions around us currently are so obviously not enough. And we have to think about African and African American studies as a model for how we go forward, and to recognize that all of the assumptions of how disciplines are established, the assumptions of how institutions develop, that we can change them. That we can change them through a vision of community, a vision that takes seriously the history of exploitation that is at the heart of this country. I started out as a literary scholar. My PhD is in English. I joined the faculty at Duke 2 years ago, and somewhat surprisingly, I'm now the chair of the department for the first time in my entire professional career. I initially thought of myself primarily as a literary scholar, but I have found my home in African and African American studies because this is the only discipline in the academy that takes seriously as its mission social justice. We are surrounded by institutions of higher education that are focused more on their own survival than on a vision of a better society. They're focused more on professional student success, more on the material consequences of a degree, rather than on envisioning a nation that takes seriously an egalitarian way of life, a way of life that recognizes how this country has exploited so many different communities. So I could not be prouder to be part of African and African American Studies at Duke. We have been in existence for quite some time. Like some of my colleagues, we are now in a time of crisis. I take seriously what Julia was saying earlier, that African and African American Studies has perhaps always been in a time of crisis. I think this is an especially bad one. We are at Duke right now under a hiring freeze, and so no part of the college is growing. Nonetheless, my colleagues and I have sustained a graduate certificate program that is one of the largest in the college. We have wonderful students who come to us hungry for knowledge, hungry for an understanding of the world that they're not receiving in other classrooms. What else can I tell you about the program, or about the departments? We have struggled in conversations about developing a PhD program. At this point, I don't know how we can do that on our own, but I can see there is such a need right now for scholars who are trained in this discipline, in this way of seeing and conceptualizing the world. So I am looking for ways, especially among colleagues here tonight, to pursue just the furthering of this discipline, because I think it could not be more necessary than right now.
Good evening. How's everyone? Good to see you. Good to see you. I'm Claude Clegg. I'm the chair of the Department of African American, and Diaspora Studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Good to be here at Wake Forest University. My kindred spirits, my colleagues here, have more or less said about everything that I wanted to say, perhaps just to draw some things together in terms of the larger discipline of Africana Studies. Some very bullet point things in terms of the history, some similarities, and very brief comments about the current state of things. As has already been said, about all of these programs, and whether they're programs or curricula or departments or just majors, and there's a spectrum of kinds of Africana Studies programs. All of them are born of struggle. That's just the nature of them. Typically, those that are the oldest go back to about the late 1960s, early 1970s, Black Power movement, Black student movement, and so forth, struggle. And it's been incremental struggle for about all of them ever since. It was more or less these students organizing and demanding more faculty, Black faculty to teach, more courses, a a questioning, an interrogation of the traditional curriculum and courses, again, that would destabilize the traditional Western curriculum and often anti-Black curriculum that was in place at many of these places. And then a lot of pushing administrations at these institutions, which often, the conversation would often be, okay, you all can have the courses, but you can't have a major. Okay, you can have the major, but a minor, but you can't have the major. You can have the major, but not a program. You can have a program, but not a department. You can have a department, but not a graduate program. And to just, the sort of institutional unwillingness to own the discipline as an institutionalized part of the institution, whatever the college is. And Black Studies, Africana Studies, African American Studies, whatever the moniker, being on the periphery and being something that was there to quiet students for the most part. And often being the object of neglect, and not necessarily benign neglect either, in many of these programs. If you want to get a good sense of how any given Africana Studies program is doing, look at the state of Black America and see how it's doing. Just very recently, when a policeman strangles a man to death under his shoe in 2020, and the world sees this, all of a sudden our programs are in vogue, and everyone wants to hire someone, and everyone wants to teach it, and so forth. So sort of in a morbid way, Mr. Floyd's death sort of spikes interest in what we're doing. Flip it on its head, you have a turn in the political culture, and we're out of vogue, and there's attacks on DEI and critical race theory and so forth. We're out of vogue. That is, the university is downstream from politics and culture. So if you want to get a sense of what's going on at the university, look at what's going on in the larger culture in terms of the place of Black studies. In terms of UNC Chapel Hill, it is a similar pattern to what my colleagues are saying here. Struggle pushing on the administration. Some administrations are friendlier than others to get things done in terms of getting a major, getting a minor, getting a departmental status, and so forth, and internal things that are going on in these departments. I don't want to give you a sense that all these departments are monolithic. They indeed are not. There are places that are departmentalized. There are places that are just programs. There are places that have majors but don't have departmental status. There are places that just have concentrations. There are places that just have courses that are taught and don't have any structure beyond that. And then within these departments, identity debates about what we call ourselves, which is no small thing. So what's in a name? A lot's in a name, right? Names have changed over the years. Africana Studies is 15, 20 years old. It's not an old, the discipline is not old, and even the identity struggles that the discipline, the growing pains of the discipline are very recent as well. And the diasporic term, that is the addition of the term diaspora, no more than 20 years. So there are internal things going on within these departments, I think, that enrich them, whether the department's going to do joint hires, whether they're just going to do single discipline hires, and that sort of thing. Those are debates to give texture to these departments to make them, even with this in our state here in North Carolina, there are a dozen or so programs, but there are all sorts of iterations of these programs in the state itself, and they have a particular flavor, and you can look across the national landscape and see the same thing. So diversity of programs, diversity of experiences, diversity of support, and diversity of neglect in terms of these programs as well. The current moment is fraught, as my colleagues have said. It's a very fraught moment, and I would say that for academia more generally, it's a fraught moment. We're in a moment, the funding is an issue in terms of state funding, in terms of federal grants, and so forth. But even more fundamental than that, the university as an institution is under assault. And of course, we're part of the university. And even more fundamental than that, expertise, facts, evidence-driven argumentation. What is reality? Who gets to shape reality? Who has free speech? Who doesn't? Fundamental things are under assault at the university, and Africana Studies, I think, is a hyper-assault against us in that. And we're not alone. Women and gender studies, Middle Eastern Studies, there are other departments, history departments and so forth. They're under assault as well. So two things that are positive and negative about this climate. One, that we're sort of in the boat together in terms of academia. It's not just Africana Studies. It's the idea of the university is under assault, and there are those who would dismantle some of the best universities in the world just because they want to get rid of those universities, or those universities are places of dissent, which says something about the political atmosphere that we're in. And they just assume burn it all down, and us with it, of course. So it's not just a case of Africana Studies. I think we're under a particular kind of assault. I think the tip of the spear hits us first. But it's an assault on the whole idea, again, of the university, of critical inquiry, of questioning authority. All the things that we teach you all to do and encourage you to do when you come to the university, that's under assault. It's not all negative. I think that we have been caught flat-footed, unfortunately, as an institution, as the university. Even us within institutions or within departments and programs that are used to assaults, I think the university as a thing, as an institution, as a societal product, has been caught flat-footed, and we haven't quite found our voice yet against some well-organized and relentless opposition in terms of the attack. I think we can find the voice. Hopefully we'll get more into this as we have a conversation. I think we'll have to stand up in unison. The strategy has been to pick us off one by one. It's been a successful strategy so far. And to duck out of sight so that you're not the next one to be picked off. That's not a good strategy. It's not a winning strategy. So I do think there are ways in which the university, including Africana Studies, can stand up in this moment. We haven't seen it yet, but I think there are ways and that needs to be done. But again, this idea of struggle now is a universalized struggle. It's not just the case that certain departments are under attack. The whole university is under attack. And again, in a sort of morbid way, it provides a certain cover for individual programs since the whole university is under attack. But at the same time, the attack is hyper-concentrated in certain areas as well.
Great, thank you. So from programs to departments, faculty lines that expand and contract, origins that reach back to student groups as well as individuals. You've had a chance to hear the context, the individuals, the circumstances, and the conflicts that inform the growth and development of the institutions represented here. I earned my MA in Afro-American Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and my PhD in English there. And I think what has always drawn me to Black studies was the idea of a Black imagination. And what I want to do is, if we can shift the energy, because I think that there's a lot going on that is dispiriting, it risks, drawing us closer to despair. And I want to lead off with a question that considers the futures. So as you think about the future and futures of Africana Studies, what emerging areas of scholarship most excite you? What new possibilities are expanding the discipline? How can Africana Studies advance scholarship on some of the most pressing issues in our society and world? Because I think that there can be disciplinary push-pull factors. And so I think about those lights that we have within our disciplines that could potentially draw students and opportunities to us, even in the face of everything that's going on today.
I'm happy to start. I'm happy to start for a number of reasons. In my applied philosophy life, or a segment of my life, I do work in corporate responsibility. And I think hearing my colleagues' comment and certainly the question of strategy that Claude raised, I think there is an opportunity for Africana Studies. And that opportunity from my perspective, well, I should preface this by saying that I'm generally I'm optimistically inclined. So basically, you wouldn't be surprised to hear from me that I think, despite the moment, despite the times, that there are bright futures ahead. And I say this for two basic reasons. From my applied philosopher's perspective as a corporate responsibility person, it seems to me that the market forces that are assaulting the university, and by consequence assaulting African American, African Diaspora, Africana Studies department, by extension, these market forces will impact these programs, disciplines, departments, and so on. But I think in there is also a particular strategy. And I draw from a number of sources to speak to, despite the development of digital technology and all of the other things that it promises, there is still a need for critical thinking. There's still a need from the ethical perspective, from my view, there is still a need to draw these rare earth resources, these basic material. They happen to be outside of Europe, most of those. And so to the extent that these market forces are pressing on the university or the Africana Studies writ large departments, knowledge of these outside environments, outside of Europe, is going to be crucial. I'm not using this as an instrumental tool, right? I'm not saying that we need to study Africana Studies so that we can become better businessmen or businesswomen. That's not the point. However, the point is, however, that there are those area expertise that are necessary in order for the moment to go forward. Digital technology notwithstanding and so on, there's a need for considering whether these resources, these rare earths, these various minerals and materials that are needed to sustain the digital life, that they are anchored in various marginalized communities. And from an ethical perspective, there is a need to sort of reconsider whether or not business is worthwhile when communities are being depleted. So whether we do it within the discipline or within departments, it seems to me that there is, and that to me is an optimistic disposition, right? That the ethical requirements, the demands, the responsibilities for both corporations and humane living will ask us to begin to question our interaction with the market forces. So that's one perspective. If I may go on another, which I think perhaps, can I? No, I'll pass on. Okay.
Hold that thought. Let me see what everyone else has to say.
The question was about what are the new directions in Africana Studies and thought. I'm not an optimist. I look at our society right now, and it seems like almost every aspect of American life is in crisis. The CDC, FEMA, the EPA, all of these federal agencies have been gutted, right? How did we get to this moment? I ask my colleagues, I ask my friends, I ask my family all the time, how did we get here? I do not think we can answer that question without the tools of people like James Baldwin, like Toni Morrison, like Martin Luther King. We have to turn to theorists and thinkers who take race seriously as a premise of social organization of this country. I don't think we can understand the election of our current president outside of just incredibly destructive racial relations and dynamics. African American Studies provides, I think, the theoretical and methodological framework by which to understand that. And so for me, it's like we are living in utterly bewildering times. And I turn to people like Audre Lorde, I turn to people like James Baldwin to try to figure out, how is this happening? How is it that we have elected a convicted felon, someone who brags about sexually harassing women? How did this happen, right? And to me, it is inextricable from a racialized backlash against the gains of the civil rights movement. And we cannot understand that without drawing upon the insights of African and African American studies scholars.
I'm optimistic, but at the same time, I'm in full agreement with what my colleague just said, Stephanie just said. I'm a historian, so I take the long view. We've seen worse times in this country. There have been worse times in terms of slavery and Jim Crow and segregation and lynching and yada, yada, yada. So that being the background to the current moment, we've seen worse moments, although that's not to belittle or that's not to downplay the current moment that we're in currently. In terms of the discipline, I'm encouraged by the young people, I'm encouraged by the students and the sort of creative ways in which they are leveraging Africana Studies and courses and minors and majors with a number of other things going on in their academic lives. So I have seen students pair the major and the minor in our department with public health in the midst of the pandemic, or data science and African American Studies, or biology and African American Studies, and of course the other traditional disciplines that you would expect to see, history and so forth. But I've seen really interesting sort of mixtures of the courses and the majors and minors in Africana Studies with a lot of other things, and students coming up with some unique honors projects and theses and papers and so forth. And I think a lot of them are really consciously doing this in a market-facing way. That is, they're thinking in terms of, I really like these courses in Africana Studies, but I want to also be a nurse. I also want to be a scientist. I also want to get that computer science degree. And the kind of synergies that this mixture of things creates, that's one of the things I've been really fascinated by in the digital age, how the students are thinking about social justice and thinking about organizing and thinking about how we should study these things and so forth through an Africana Studies lens. In my own department in Chapel Hill, one of the turns we've seen is the hottest, most popular courses that we teach are Afro-Latin America and Caribbean courses, which is, like, who knew? But it makes a certain sort of sense in terms of the demographics, the demographic change and churn that we're seeing in this country, and in terms of the demographics of the student population. So that has been just really interesting. Of course, African American Studies and African Studies, we still have good enrollments there and people concentrating and taking courses there. But it's been really interesting to see that sort of Afro-Latin America, Caribbean turn that I think the profession has taken over the last 20 years. Afro-Europe or Black Europe has also sort of been a place of curiosity, but not nearly as well developed in terms of the literature or art. I think sort of a turn of the discipline in that direction. But Afro-Latin America, Caribbean, and a lot of thematic things that they're doing. Looking at, again, Black studies in terms or Black social protests in the digital age and the age of social media and those sorts. They're asking questions. The students, the young people are asking questions that I was not asking when I was a student in the 20th century, when there was no internet for the most part, so I would not have been able to ask those questions anyway. But the kinds of questions that they are asking, the kinds of ways they're leveraging our discipline to explode it outward and talk about race and social justice in the digital age, or race and inequality in the age of a pandemic, or thinking about the connectedness of the world in this age in which a post on a forum can reach anywhere in the world and become viral immediately. It's a different sort of way of thinking about the discipline, of course, but it's a different kind of way or lens or ability to think about the world and how our particular lens can let us look at a world that is a new world. You know, the digital world is a new world, and our students are digital natives. Compared to myself, I'm a migrant to that world. Of course, there's the underside of that, the whole AI thing, and grading papers that you know to have been written by AI, and how students are native to that sort of thing as well. But of course, there's opportunities there as well. That is Africana Studies in the world of AI, and what does that mean for people of African descent to encounter this world in which artificial intelligence is mapped onto so many different things. So I'm cautiously optimistic, I would say, and appreciate certainly the realism of those who don't share the optimism. I think this will pass. We will be different on the other end of it. That's the uncertain part. The country will be different, democracy will be different, race will be different, and so forth. That's, you know, and it will always be the case. We're always evolving. We're always becoming. That's the nature of identity. It is always unstable and becoming. But I do think we'll get past this moment. I don't think we'll get past this moment by simply passively hoping to get past this moment.
All of these other responses are profound. I would only add, when I think about UNCG and its uniqueness, you know, A&T is down the street. They don't have a Black Studies department. You know, it's meant to be infused in everyday life. And so we're the public university in the city that has this tremendous opportunity to work from Greensboro and its ongoing history, I think, of engagements with questions of humanity and inequality. And I think what can be helpful for our students is for them to think of and have opportunities to be part of telling those stories, of participating in those spaces. You know, if we're thinking about how we end up with neo-Nazis and the KKK as one big alt-right group, and how the role that Greensboro played and all of that, and really the fact that that history is still folding out, you know, that the legal records, the depositions of folks who were active in that moment, perpetrators are just beginning to come out from under seal. There's opportunities, I think, for students to participate in those, in the telling of those stories, and to think of themselves as these active agents in those stories. I mean, I think, Eddy, you were saying that you want students to have that end result of ethical action, right? I hope I'm not. You can say it much better than I can. But, you know, that I think as educators, it's what we hope for our students, that we're creating a universe where they themselves can be informed and learn how to participate with each other and act. And there's a lot of ways, I think, a lot of potential, a lot of ways that we can do that work. So your knowledge, your knowledge, your knowledge, your knowledge, our collective knowledge meets them halfway with the digital native stuff, right?
Do we think one more, or should we open for Q&A? Q&A? Okay. All right. So we'll move on to Q&A. And if those of you who have questions, I'm happy to circulate so that you can speak into the mic and everyone can hear what you have for our panelists. Is there one?
My name is David Leach. Thank you. I was wondering, how would you go about decentralizing the American perspective when discussing studies, because it has been so linked to African American studies, but most of these perspectives don't come from Americans, and some don't even come from Africans. So how would we go about decentralizing that lens that we view the studies? Thank you.
Yes, that's a very good question, and it's fitting because my own department is not an African American department, and the tension that we have in the department is, if it's a tension at all, but rather is how to center race, right? And it's not really. From our colleagues who hail from certain parts of Africa, race is not the major issue. And so in African American context, in the American context, race plays a major role, and it's important to grapple with it. It's important to try to eradicate it. That may be controversial, right? Because some folks want to hold on to the blackness of themselves, as some other folks want to hold on to the whiteness of themselves. But as they do that, they also let go and neglect. They develop other minorities, right? And you can see various other minorities trying to do the same thing. Let me highlight my particular component. Let me highlight my particular component. I personally don't think that's the right way of proceeding, right? It's a good area of study because there is a history that is undeniable, right? Of the trajectory of race and the exploitation on the basis of the construction of race and so on. But the other side and the other sort of group within the department, it's not a very large department, but you can see that element, are those who hail from various parts of Africa, where they are concerned about the environment. They are concerned about the cultural, the many ethnicities that are within national boundaries in Africa. And the future that I see is not necessarily in sort of compiling identities and trying to combat this European identity, but rather of the kinds of long legacies of cultural developments, of imaginations that are found in other parts of the world, not necessarily in Africa, but Africa is a large place, right? And it has a long history. And drawing from that history, the same way that India is a large place with a long history, the same way that China is a large place, and so forth, right? And the impact of Japan has had a long history as well, and so forth. And part of what we are cultivating in the context of the department is how do we mine these multiple cultures so as to make for a better present, if not a better present, to strategize for a better future. I hope that answers in part the question.
Hi, I'm Esha, or Professor Shirley for my students who are in the back. I'm a faculty member of the African American Studies department here. Thank you all for being here. I'm glad we get to be in community with each other. I wanted to pick up on a breadcrumb that Julia left earlier about the relationship between our institutionality and its inevitable failure and what we do about that strategically, or how we think about it. And so I would just love to hear whoever's interested on the panel, your thoughts on how we don't just think in terms of, though I think this is important, surviving in our institutions, but also how are you thinking about looking beyond them in your different contexts?
Your question gets to, I think, one of identity, which is at the core of the discipline. And I think different places have struggled with it and continue to struggle with this question of what's the place of the department, program, curriculum, or whatever it's called within the institution. And again, a lot depends on the culture of the institution, how this program came into being, how well supported or badly neglected it was, and so forth. I think that there are programs like mine that have struggled to become institutionalized. That is, to be thought of as like the history department, or the math department, or the political science department, and so forth. And there's no need to make an argument why we have this department. No one makes an argument of why you have a history department, or why you have an economics department. It's just assumed that if you're going to be a university, you have to have a history department. No one's going to come for the history department. They might come for certain things taught in the history department. They're not going to abolish the history department. So I think that in the case of this discipline, there are others, but in the case of Africana Studies, that has always been the sort of sword hanging over us. That is, we're in the academy, we are in the institution, but we're not necessarily on an equal footing with some of these more traditional disciplines and so forth, or accepted as such. And it gets to other issues in terms of how these programs are set up. Some try to enmesh themselves in the institution by having joint appointments. And of course, that's a double-edged sword too. You know, it's good in terms of it connects perhaps a department with other departments, but also it divides the labor, perhaps it complicates the identity and so forth. And you have some people in the department who have joint appointments in other places, and then people who have single appointments in Africana Studies, and that creates a kind of tension in addition to all the tensions that Eddy just said in terms of who does what geography, or who thinks through a prism of race, and who thinks through primarily a disciplinary lens. And not all our departments are insurgent departments. There are those departments that are, I think, and they embrace a sort of activist mentality, or activist mode of approaching the world, and are connected beyond the university into the community and so forth. But there are departments that are much less insurgent than that, and they are, I think, fine with having strong ties to established disciplines, or just having the established disciplines in blackface represented in the department. So your question is a great, complicated question in terms of Black Studies programs. I think that we can generally say that many of them have struggled with becoming institutionalized in the sense that they're thought of as any other quote-unquote traditional department. They're not. That has not been what I have observed. Some don't want to be. I think some think that there's a mission in struggle, and there's a mission in terms of the activism, and that makes these programs special in ways that we don't see economists out, revolutionizing the world. And nothing against economists or anything like that, but those in some of the traditional Black Studies has taken on a mission of social justice and things that my colleagues have said. And there are others saying that would say, if this is a serious academic mission or department, it shouldn't have to take on the burden of the activism and being the tip of the spear and taking on the brunt of the societal criticism and so forth. It is enough to do the academic intellectual mission well. And the other stuff, do it on your own time. We do the intellectual stuff well. So it's a great question about identities. I think that every department struggles with that, even in the name. You know, I have colleagues who'd be offended to be called Black Studies scholars. They would say, I don't do this black stuff. I do Africa, or I do the Caribbean, I do Cuba and so forth. I don't do black stuff. And then there are those individuals who say that's the thing that makes us unique, that we've embraced that, and it cuts across all these other it unites the historian in the department, the political science assistant in the department, the English literature guy in the department or woman in the department. That is this lens of blackness. That is the thing, you know. So you miss the point when you say I'm not a Black Studies scholar, or I'm a scholar of Afro-Cuba, or I'm a scholar of Nigeria. So you miss the point when you say you set aside the blackness part of it. Again, a number of different identity things sometimes they can be a creative tension. Sometimes they can be a destructive tension in a department as well. I don't think we're alone in that. I think you could probably find the same thing in a women and gender studies department or a religious studies department and so forth, in which you have people from various disciplinary backgrounds coming and trying to do a collective common project, which has a lot of complicated pieces and histories to it. It's a great question. I don't have a pat answer for you, but that's how my mental gears operate in terms of the great question.
All right, thank you. Let's give our panelists a final round of applause. Corey, would you like some final words, thoughts? Okay, all right. Well, can't help it.
Thank you, Shanna. First of all, thank my colleagues. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for spending your time with us today. We're one of the younger programs in the state of North Carolina, but to have colleagues like you come together and work with us as we continue to build here at Wake Forest is tremendous and amazing. And I want to thank Claude in particular, because it was Claude and a phone call that started getting all of us together. Right after the pandemic, right after things started opening up. And from there, it's been, fits and starts, we've been coming together, but now much more consistently. So thank you, Claude, for that. I think we ended on a great note, really on a collective community project. And an intellectual community can't respond easily to complex questions in a simplistic, one-dimensional manner. It is the complexities, like Professor Shirley's question reminded us. It's the complexities that come in and the complexities of perspectives that is uniquely the Africana Studies project. And when you think of that project, its institutional formation may be a little over a half century old. Most disciplines are not that old. I mean, disciplines emerge in the modern university in the late 1800s to the early 1900s. They really explode after World War II. So we tend to think that disciplines become the dominant identity of universities, but what Black Studies does is it turns a mirror on the university to understand that knowledge production and reproduction and knowledge formation in the university can take any number of guises. And if we want to wed experience, epistemology, and ethics together, we can do that in a great and genuine manner and in an authentic manner that can transform the world. So I want to thank our colleagues. I want to thank my dear colleagues, Shanna and Julia, for their constant friendship. They're amazing scholars, but they're also beautiful friends. And we want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. We're going to have more programs. You'll see we're bringing Dana Williams here for homecoming. So Dana Williams will be here in October, and she'll be discussing her wonderful new book, Tony at Random, with Professor Benjamin, and that's amazing. And if we did not say it, let's say it publicly, that Professor Benjamin is our newest endowed professor in African American Studies. She is the Reynolds Professor of African American Studies. So we're excited about that. Thank you all for coming out, and have a wonderful evening.